Howdy, varmints and patrons of the night. It is your most wanted gunslinger, BD, and I am the host of the Horror Tavern. And today I'm going to be doing a review for my very first Briane Keene book that I got the pleasure to read. And this was a unique read because it featured two old Western stories within one novella. And of course, my very first Briane Keene book, I've heard a lot of praise and recommendations for him by different people. He's a very famous author in the horror community, and one of my friends, Michael, who is his channels include Michael Goosebumps Fan, and he's got a channel called Night of the Living Dude where he does horror movie reviews, and he's also got a Mr. Wildboy 94 channel where he has reviewed Briane Keene books because that's one of his favorite authors, and he's done reviews on his channel for that. So I've gotten his recommendations, and I decided to finally take a read because this was a book that he covered a little bit ago as the new Briane Keene book that he read. And I heard him review it, and I thought that the plot synopsis sounded interesting, and I decided to pick it up. And this was a great read. I had a really fun time reading and checking out these stories because even though the book is called An Occurrence in Crazy Bear Valley, that's just the name of the first story. There's actually a second shorter story that's featured in here, so you get a pairing of two short stories within this novella-length book. So let's talk about it. So, if you like this video, again, by the end of it, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below and hit that like button. It's a free way to support me. Let me know you guys are engaged with the content. And without further ado, let's get into our review. So as I mentioned, this is a pairing of two short stories that are based on old Western stories that Briane Keene wrote. By reading some of the the forewords or like the messages that he keeps after the stories, he basically explains that these were old Western stories that he wrote for other authors and editors' short story collections that may have not made it or got eventually dropped off into like lesser known short story collections that are kind of lost in time now. So he decided, let me take these two lesser known stories and put them in a book and kind of promote that as its own thing. So again, like I mentioned, these stories involve cowboys. These stories involve the Old West, and all of them, both of the stories have creature feature action in it, which I absolutely love. So hearing the fact that you got old Western cowboy stuff in this book, which is one of my favorite shit to read about, period, and you got creature feature, which is like my favorite subgenre of horror, put together, that's a match made in heaven for me. And that's why this book is so great, because I loved both the stories in here. The first story is what the book is named after. It's called An Occurrence in Crazy Bear Valley. An Occurrence in Crazy Bear Valley's plot synopsis, without giving too much away, is about these group of cowboy bandits, criminals that are basically on the run. They're riding horseback into the forest because they're getting chased by this local town who sent out bounty hunters and people. These are all very wanted criminals. Their bounties have been shooting through the roof because of all the different crime sprees and stuff that they've been doing. So they eventually decide to basically flee and escape into the woods. And as they flee and escape into the woods, they get to this valley area, very beautiful, very luscious. It's got dense foliage of trees. It's got these beautiful rainbow-colored wildflowers that are spread across in fields. You got this glistening kind of like creek or river that shines and separates this side of the woods to the other valley. And as they get within this patch of woods, they see that there is this cabin, this kind of rinky-dink, shabby cabin in the middle of the woods. And there's a group of lumberjacks that are working on some timber over there. And basically these cowboys decide, well, we now got a place for shelter and food potentially, so let's take care of business. And right away they pull out the guns and shoot all these guys in the head, kill them. And as soon as they break down into the cabin, they basically see that there is a woman, this kind of like pretty looking but disheveled and traumatized girl who's tied up to a like pole that's in the middle of the cabin. And they see that there's stuff wrong about the cabin, like it's very, again, rinky-dink. There's just one room that everything happens. The kitchen has got like moldy food and stuff. There's like moldy potatoes packed up. There's a bucket where everybody was apparently pissing and shitting in, so it smells horrendous in there, and the hygiene is horrible. And it turns out that much like, you know, these cowboys ended up saving a girl named Clara, who was like, she was a whore. She was from a whorehouse, a prostitute. that they brought on and basically took into her, I guess, group. And this is also a prostitute, but in the case of that, these lumberjacks apparently stole this girl like they did, and they were sexually assaulting her and basically using her, and every day they would tie her to the pole and basically kind of just leave her there, mistreat her. So eventually the leader of this cowboy crew, Morgan, decides to release her and says, we're going to set you free, but while we're here, you got to agree to do us services, what you did for the lumberjacks, but then we're going to take care of you and let you go. And if you decide to leave, you can leave, otherwise you can join us. So this cowboy crew is better than the lumberjacks, but they're still criminals. You got to understand that. They're cowboys. They're wanted men. They've committed murders. They've committed robberies. They've done a bunch of stuff. Even though they're better than the lumberjacks by a tiny bit, they're still felons. But they got that cowboy, that, Red Dead Redemption charm to them. And what they end up doing is they take the lumberjacks' bodies that they shot and killed and end up hanging them outside because they think that that's a good way to attract some food. They could potentially lure in maybe some wolves, some coyotes, maybe there could be a bear that comes by, and they got guns. They can just shoot, kill the bear, strip it, eat it, and get basically a whole week's worth of supper out of that. But what ends up happening is that as they send out this one guy, they have a lot of banter between each other. They sort of riff on each other and act like your typical cowboy group of like felons and criminals. But they got that charm. They're funny the way they're written, and you actually pretty much like them. But they send out one of the kind of lower rank guys in the crew outside to go basically like check on the bodies of the lumberjacks and see if like he can get some stuff. And what ends up happening is that as he goes out there, he comes back and he seems a little bit traumatized or weirded out. And they kind of pick up on this, especially Morgan, the leader of the group. And he's like, yo, what's up with you, Stevens? Why are you acting so weird? And he's like, when I went out there, I smelled something horrendous. He said that it smelled like rotting dead bodies that filled up the entire valley area. Like the smell of this rotting dead like body musk. It smells wet. It smells like some type of musk, wet musk mixed with dead bodies that's basically encompassing the entire valley. And he got freaked out. He's like, I don't know what could be making that smell. And they start questioning him. They're like, you know what? It might be the bodies, the lumberjacks or whatever. And right away, Stevens is like, nah, the bodies are fresh kills. They haven't been out there long enough to produce this smell. So it's something else. And that's when the girl who was the one getting sexually assaulted and tied up that they freed as a captive, that's when she tells them about these things out in the woods called the crazy bears. And the crazy bears are apparently something that the lumberjacks told her about, that they are some type of creatures and entities that have been around in these woods and the valleys longer than the Indians, the Native Americans who lived here, because the Native Americans were the ones who were basically telling stories about these creatures and saying that they've been around longer than us. And they start to be a little bit weirded out. They think that maybe the lumberjacks were pulling her leg, or even she might be pulling their leg. But the leader, Morgan, is basically able to read the girl's facial expressions and tell that, nah, she's telling the truth. Like there's actually some truth to it. So he keeps prodding her, and she explains that, the Native Americans and the lumberjacks bring food to these crazy bears, give them food offerings, that they live in this cave that's across the valley, and that's where the smell is coming from. The smell is described to be this insanely powerful musk that smells like, live dead bodies that are wet. Nasty work. But they say that, these crazy bears, even though they are intimidating, they're more than meets the eye. They're not like anything out here else in the woods. They are not necessarily dangerous. They're more curious than anything. And eventually what ends up happening is that as they're waiting to basically get a bear or some type of animal that's going to come up to these carcasses, while one of the main older sniper dudes is waiting out by the window, while the others are basically sleeping and just resting off, he smells that disgusting rotting carcass musk pull up through the valley in the woods, and he ends up seeing one of the crazy bears pull up to these carcasses, and he may or may not end up successfully shooting it. And by the time they basically all wake up and get up to go check out and see the body laid out by the valley approaching them, they start hearing these insane crazy noises just flooding throughout the entire forest. It's like whooping sounds. They describe it as like a bobcat screaming plus a bear roaring. So it's like a deep, guttural, loud roar mixed with some screaming that's echoing at dozens of points throughout the forest. So they think that there might be like a whole clan of them yelling across the entire valley. And the next day, after this like thick mist clears up and they kind of wait to go out there and check the body, they see that the body is gone. The body of this crazy bear that they shot has disappeared. And they see these giant footprints that are laid out throughout it. And eventually, it may or may not happen that they have to get basically bunked up inside of this rickety old cabin, fortify it, and keep their guns ready, because these crazy bears may or may not be a little bit vengeful after what happened to one of their own kind. And that's where I'm going to leave the story at, because there's more that happens, but I think it's better if you read it. I specifically did not describe anything about the crazy bears and what they are, because the crazy bears are a well-known monster. You'll figure out what the story is alluding to, and it's pretty on the nose as to what these creatures are supposed to represent. I mean, it's pretty clear if you see the cover of what's on the thumbnail and you see the stories about it, you can understand what's going on. And Briane Keene said in the afterword that he was inspired to write the story because of a real life cryptid attack that happened, and it's a pretty famous case. And I know about it. I don't know the exact name of it, but I heard about this cryptid case, I think on Mr. Ballen's channel. Mr. Ballen is a huge YouTuber, 9 million subscribers. He's one of my favorite like horror YouTubers out there. He covers a bunch of real life true crime stories, creepypastas. He's an amazing dude. But I think he covered this cryptid attack scene before, where apparently some hunters had shot and killed one of these cryptids, and they had like rocks thrown at their cabin, and they were basically surrounded. So this is sort of paying homage to that and inspired by that. And yeah, this is a very well-written and intense story. I very much enjoyed this story. It's a great short story because there's a certain sense of atmosphere and tension throughout this entire short story. You get that tension of, you know, these cowboys, these criminals basically being locked inside of the cabin. They're stranded. You get that fear that they're being watched, that they're being hunted, that these crazy bears are more than anybody could ask for. And you definitely get that aura off the villains that makes you intimidated and scared. And they're in a really bad situation because they're locked in the forest right now and this cabin because their horses are exhausted. They've been running for days on horseback to try to escape these bounty hunters, and people are coming after them. So if they escape too soon, their horses might still be exhausted and they'll get stranded out in the woods with these crazy bears who are vengeful against them. And worst case, they could also run into the bounty hunters that are after their heads. So there's a lot of factors going on that make these guys desperate. The way Briane Keene writes about the crazy bears, how intimidating and scary they are, the presence that they have, and the climax is so violent and so brutal and so terrifying that you imagining yourself in it will scare the bricks off you. Like, it is fucking scary imagining yourself in the attack scene involving this short story. I mean, it's wild. It's wild. It gets more violent than I expected. It got more intense than I expected. And the ending leaves a little bit to be desired. I mean, it's sort of like a melancholy, sad ending. Feels a little bit disappointing. I thought they could have done maybe more with it, maybe done like a twist or something. So that's why I didn't give it a higher score than I did. But this short story, An Occurrence in Crazy Bear Valley, still gets a 9 out of 10, which means that this is an A rank. It is a great short story, and I suggest you guys definitely check it out. But the second short story in this book is even better. The second short story is called Lost Canyon of the Damned. And this is a zombie virus story taking place in the Wild West. And this zombie virus is apparently from the afterword, the same zombie virus that he writes in some of his famous books like The Rising or Dead Rising or whatever his books are about the zombie outbreak. This is the same virus, and he explains this is what it would be like if that virus was, taking place in the Wild West. Now, I've not read those books, but this is my first starter into Briane Keene. So this is the first time I'm reading about this zombie virus, and it is fucking awesome. It is fucking disturbing. It is fucking brutal as shit. There's so much fire-ass shit in this short story. This short story is pretty simple. It's about a group of these not cowboys, but it takes place in the Wild West. It's about a group of people that escape the town. You got a couple cowboys, you got a preacher, you got a woman, you got a younger guy who are basically been riding on horseback for days out in the middle of the desert because they're being chased by hundreds of zombies. There was a zombie outbreak that broke out on a Native American property. There were these like infected dead rats. They explained that the rats had like missing eyes and they had maggots clinging to the body, and these dead rats had like rib cages poking out. So these rats were running around these Native American tribe camps and basically started biting the Native Americans. And then the Native Americans started turning into zombies, and then all started becoming ravenous and attacking, you know, some of the colonists and some of the people in the local town. So eventually this whole town gets infected, and these group of like 5 people, including a preacher, a woman, the 2 cowboys, and the young boy, have been riding on these exhausted horses for days in the middle of the scorching desert while they see out in the horizon that there's hundreds of black dots, which represent all the town's population as zombies chasing them. And it's not just zombie people. No, this virus affects animals. So you got zombie coyotes, zombie dogs, you know, you got zombie horses, zombie cows. You got all these animals that are basically pursuing and trying to consume these 5 people, ravenous for flesh. And because they're zombies, they never get exhausted. They never need food. They never need water. They can just keep on running and running. Meanwhile, you are becoming tired and exhausted. All these people got dry, cracked lips. They haven't had any food or water for days. Their horses are about to collapse, but they're just powering through with just sheer will. And they're basically being targeted. And you even got some amazing descriptions about the fact that they end up having this like flock of like vultures, these vultures and birds that end up swarming around him in the air. The sky turns like black, and they see all these dead, you know, these zombie vultures, these zombie birds, and they explain that, you know, their feet are falling off, their feathers are molting off, their beaks are falling off, and they all eventually start diving down and trying to attack these guys on the horses. And it is brutal. Some people get attacked and killed in some violent ways. I mean, it is crazy to hear about how the zombie virus affects every single animal, can affect people, and just the sheer scale of this apocalypse-like situation in the middle of the fucking Badlands, pretty much. And they eventually get to a canyon, and they see that it might be some sort of trick oasis, because they see just this luscious green forest, this luscious green jungle, and they're like, there's no way this could be it. And as they're tracking the map, they see that this area that they came to between this very, you know, kind of narrow canyon, like it's not on the map. This is an untracked area in the middle of this Wild West desert. And it's completely strange. It seems like, you know, something out of like Ice Age, like this pure, vast, you know, megafauna type of jungle. And that what I just said might be a hint as to what they might find within this forest, because let's just say they find some really odd things which make no real sense, to be honest. There's no real explanation as to why they exist outside of the fact that potentially this was some untracked area that somehow allowed them to live longer than what people expected them to, and they start encountering this megafauna and getting into problems with it. And, you know, then eventually the zombies catch up to them, and it becomes a wild, crazy story. And to be fair, that part of the short story doesn't make much sense as to why this environment exists, why these creatures exist, but it was fun. It was that retro pulp, batshit crazy to the wall, balls to the wall type of fun. And again, I loved all the zombie stuff in this story. I love the Wild West setting. Just the idea that you're riding on exhausted horses out in the middle of the desert on some John Wick, Black Stallion, and John Wick 4 shit. And the fact that you got these hundreds of zombies, black dots in the horizon, just running and chasing after you. You know, humans, coyotes, horses, dogs, cats, all this stuff. Even birds of undead vultures with pieces of their bodies falling off as they fly, just tracking you down and trying to go for human flesh. It is so crazy to think about that. And when they get to this, you know, new environment, then you mix the zombies with the new environment and it gets extra intense. So I would have loved to seen this in like a movie. I think The Lost Canyon of the Damned could be adapted into a movie. I think that, you know, maybe even An Occurrence in Crazy Bear Valley could be even like a little short. I just love these stories because the Crazy Bear Valley story is more complete. It's more full, but The Lost Canyon of the Damned is just way more badass shit in it, way more wild, way more fun, and I love it for that. So that story, I would give a 9.5 out of 10. If you want a zombie story that's unique, that's going to shock you, that's going to definitely stand out with you for the rest of your life, I suggest you especially pick up this book for Lost Canyon of the Damned, because that was an amazing retro pulp short story. And overall, I'd give this book a 9.5 out of 10. I loved both the short stories. They were both A tier. The one other story, the zombie one, got into my Hall of Fame. So this is worth the pickup. Please go check it out. Please go read this. I think you'll enjoy it. And if you're like me and you've never read Briane Keene before, I think this is a good starting point. And I'm excited to read some of Briane Keene's other stuff. So yeah, that's all I got for today. Hope you guys enjoyed this review. If you did, again, hit that subscribe button and hit that like button down below. It's free. Lets me know you guys support the content. And stay tuned for more content to come for this upcoming remaining 2 months of my summer break, and even some lesser videos sprinkled throughout my college semester. So, deuces. Yo, man, I don't know what it is, bro. Cowboys make everything better. I'm just a big fucking fan of Cowboy story, and that's why I gotta stop being lazy, and I gotta pick up Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2, because all my homies were playing it. I was not on top of that shit. Shame on me. I gotta go pick that shit up. Yeehaw.